Should you give 2 weeks notice when you quit your job? Hey, I'm Abby and welcome back to the Life Work Balance YouTube channel. Today I would like to answer that exact question for you. Should you give 2 weeks notice when you quit your job? You might be fantasizing about how good it will feel to walk into your job, tell them, I quit, and leave. However, no matter how good this sounds, in most cases, it is going to be most effective and practical for you to give 2 weeks of notice minimum. Now, before I jump into exactly why you should give 2 weeks notice, please go ahead and give this video a thumbs up if you're looking forward to learning about why you should give the notice. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well as the bell so that you can receive life, work, balance advice delivered directly to you every week. Storming into your boss's office, saying, I quit, and dramatically leaving might feel good in the moment, but it certainly can backfire. In the United States, most people are considered at-will employees. If you are not an at-will employee, then this advice may not fit your situation. But in most cases, for at-will employees, you are given a choice. You can choose when you resign from your job. You could choose to resign effective immediately. You could choose to resign in 2 weeks. You could choose to resign in 6 months. You have a choice of when you get to resign. Now, there may be some cases where resigning effective immediately is appropriate. These are situations where you might be in a hostile or unsafe working environment. Maybe you have an unexpected life circumstance or family emergency that arises. And maybe your mental health is being severely impacted by this job. So there are certain times where resigning effective immediately is appropriate. However, in most cases, it is expected that you will give a minimum of 2 weeks notice. In some cases, you may even want to give more than 2 weeks notice, especially if you have a great relationship with your employer, you have been discussing a potential transition, or you're in a leadership position that is a harder to fill role, or there are projects that you're working on that you'd like to wrap up. Having a conversation about your transition and next steps is really critical. Now, you may not have the flexibility to give 6 months notice if you have another job lined up. So if you're in a position where you have another job waiting for you, then it's likely that you will want to give 2 weeks notice. Now, that is beneficial for you to maintain relationships with your current employer, and it also demonstrates the responsibility that you have for your job to your new employer. Now, if they offer you a job knowing that you are still currently employed, and you say, yes, I can start tomorrow, that raises some red flags. Your new employer may be concerned that you'll do the same thing to them when it's time for you to move on to your next step. So most new employers are not going to demand that you start your new job right now. They will expect that you'll need at minimum 2 weeks before you start your new role, and maybe we'll have a little bit of wiggle room for you. So I highly recommend that you give a minimum of 2 weeks notice if you are quitting your job. And if those other circumstances I mentioned earlier do not apply to you. Now, at the same time, because there are at-will employees in the United States, that means that your employer could potentially fire you effective immediately, similar to you giving your resignation effective immediately. And there are situations where you might give your 2 weeks notice and your employer chooses to let you go sooner. So if you are going to be giving your 2 weeks notice, you do want to ensure that you have the financial flexibility to be able to survive for those 2 weeks, potentially unemployed. Now, if you give your 2 weeks notice because you've agreed to a 2 week in the future start date with your new employer, then that is a potential conversation that you could have with your new employer about maybe moving up your start date. That may also give you grounds for retaliation with your current employer, which is illegal. Now, I am not an employment law expert, so if you do feel like you have experienced retaliation from your current employer or from a previous employer for giving your resignation, then that is definitely something you should consult with an employment lawyer about. So if you're wondering if you should give 2 weeks notice, the answer is yes. In most cases, you should give 2 weeks notice at minimum. There may be situations where you give shorter notice or longer notice, and that's all based off of your existing circumstance. So how do you go about giving your notice? Well, ideally you have a face-to-face conversation with your direct supervisor, and you let them know that you are resigning. Now, this could happen in person, this could happen via video chat like Zoom, Teams, etc. This might happen over the phone. And if you are unable to have a face-to-face or at least voice-to-voice conversation with your direct supervisor, then you may need to send them an email. When you give them your notice, you also want to include a written letter of resignation. Now, I've got 3 templates for you that you can use for this letter of resignation. You can have a very simple and straightforward letter of resignation. You can have a letter of resignation that is still fairly professional but also friendly. And then you can have a more friendly and cordial letter of resignation. And these templates are just that. They're templates. They're a starting place for you. So ensure that when you're writing your letter of resignation, that you tailor it to your specific situation and scenario. I've included the link to those resignation letter templates in the description box below. Now, once you've submitted your letter of resignation and you've had that conversation with your manager or supervisor, you will potentially have 2 or more weeks left of your employment. So you want to ensure that you maintain your professionalism so that you can have a positive end to this current employment and ideally maintain those relationships once you've left this employer. You want to ensure that you return any company property, that you clear any personal files that you might have, and even offer to assist with the transition process. Maintaining good relationships with your current employer ensures that you don't burn bridges, and you could potentially use them as references and maybe even networking connections in the future. You don't want to burn any bridges that could potentially benefit you in the future. So if you are in the process of deciding when and how to submit your resignation to your current employer, and you have any additional questions, please feel free to put your questions in the comments box below. Please also feel free to share your experiences with submitting your resignation. I have a personal experience where I gave my 2 weeks notice and my boss was not happy about it. And now, while I wasn't fired and I wasn't let go early, it did result in me essentially being blocked out of any meetings moving forward, cut out of any future communication. And while I was trying to get everything organized for my departure, but nothing new was put on my plate, but I could certainly feel the tension from my boss. She was very unhappy and did feel blindsided by me choosing to leave. However, do not let the guilt or feelings of loyalty hold you back from moving on to something that is bigger and better for you. You may have experiences like this that will shape who you are as a professional in your career. Remember what it feels like so that if you are ever in a position of power, like a manager or a supervisor, and someone gives you their 2 weeks notice, that you don't treat them with that same feeling of tension and even fear. Most employers have some shred of empathy and are humans as well. They will understand that it is time for you to move on and do something different. And they will appreciate you giving them notice so they can get organized and try to fill your position once you're gone. So if you found this video helpful, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you have any additional questions, comments, thoughts, or ideas on the topic of giving your notice or submitting your resignation, please put them in the comments box below. I love receiving comments, and I do my best to respond to each of them individually, but just know that if I'm not able to respond to them quickly, your comments that you share below will likely help someone who's going through something similar in the future. If you are in the process of submitting your resignation and you'd like to talk to someone about how to go about doing it, or strategize your job search process, please let me know. I offer one-on-one individual coaching sessions to people who are looking for exactly that. So if you would like some help with planning your resignation, with completing your job search, or preparing for interviews, please let me know. I have sessions available each week, but they do fill up quickly. So if this is something you're interested in, please reach out to me today. I've linked to my website as well as my email in the description box below, and I would love to work with you. If you haven't already, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well as the bell so that you can receive life-work balance advice delivered directly to you every week. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.